Hi folks, I'm Ignatiy Vishnevetsky.
I'm Alex Dowd.
This week we're at Farmhouse Tavern, just around the corner from the AV Club office.
Welcome to Film Club. So I feel like with a movie like Creed, you sort of have two options. You can either resist it or you can relent.
Can you explain that?
So Creed is the new Rocky spin-off slash sequel slash reboot, and it's about Adonis Creed, played by Michael B. Jordan, who's the illegitimate son of Apollo Creed. And he's basically been boxing with his own name.
Boxing is Hollywood Donnie Johnson.
Right. And he decides that he wants a boxing career as well, but he wants to stand on his own legs outside of his father's shadow. So he goes to Philadelphia and finds Rocky Balboa and sort of inevitably talks him into training him. The whole thing is built on this really rigid formula, a formula that should be familiar to people who have seen not just Rocky films,
but any boxing. I mean, this is
boxing. But, so it's one of those things where you can resist those cliches, or you can relent to them. And I feel like by the end of this, I had kind of relented.
This is a formulaic movie, but it has some really poignant notes in the scenes between Stallone and Jordan. It's a movie where you could say the middle ground is very formulaic, and then you have these very understated moments that work very well, and then these few bursts of very heightened style that also work. The first big boxing match is presented as a single take.
So I'm sort of on the fence sometimes about these long, showy single takes.
Yeah, especially when they're kind of like clearly digitally composited, as this one is.
But I think this one works because it captures both how long and how short a boxing match really is, and how punishing those 5 minutes can be. I feel like doing it in a single take really reinforces that.
Though I feel like in some ways it robs the climax of the same sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Because once you've done that, you can't do it again.
Yeah, you're right though that they sort of blow their load.
Yeah. This was kind of a passion project for Ryan Coogler, who's the director of this. He's the guy who did Fruitvale Station. So he's not really who you'd expect directing a late Rocky sequel.
Yeah, this one definitely has been, I think, designed to kind of look and play like the original.
I wish that he showed a little more personality as a director.
Well, but I think he's very good with like neighborhood flavor.
I don't think he has a very distinctive visual style.
No.
But he does have this thing that feels very unusual for a studio film. Like his camera lingers just a little bit longer on people's faces, or the take will run just a little bit longer. And that does give it a slightly offbeat quality, because I feel like a lot of times with studio films and even with American indie films, there is this idea that everything needs to have a narrative value.
And that's maybe why it's not such a bad thing that the film is so overlong, because if you think about what they would have started cutting, I think what we would end up losing is a lot of the stuff that we like about the film.
Oh, the date scene is wonderful.
The date
He
scene's
goes
great,
with Tessa Thompson's character. She plays his downstairs neighbor, and she takes him out for a cheesesteak. And there's just this little date scene that has no real bearing on the boxing movie plot. It's just about these two characters.
She is the love interest, but that actress brings a lot of character to her.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what the movie is kind of doing over and over again.
It's
what
taking
Coogler's
something
doing.
formulaic, and it's injecting a slightly more human dimension.
So a lot of what we like about Creed is the creation of this environment and this world in Philadelphia. And I feel like that's something that Carol, Todd Haynes' new movie, has going for it.
Rooney Mara plays this young woman, shop girl in a department store, Frankenberg's department store, I believe it's called.
Which, by the way, looks beautiful. I've never looked at a department store in a movie and wanted to be in there, because I hate those spaces in real life, but this one, I just want to be there.
She meets the character played by Cate Blanchett, the Carol in question. There's a sort of flirtation between them that over the course of the film develops into a relationship.
One of the many things that I like a lot about Carol is that it really sort of steeps you in this 1950s environment in a very different way than Todd Haynes' earlier Far From Heaven.
It's a very different film. It's shot on Super 16 millimeter. It's very grainy. So you're getting these very elegant classical compositions, but then they have the texture. I don't like Carol quite as much as you do, or as much as most of our colleagues do. I just never buy Rooney Mara and Cate Blanchett as two people who are in love with each other. I think they're very good at playing up the vulnerabilities of these two characters.
See, I think there's an enormous amount of sexual tension between them immediately. Carol is a character who is comfortable with who she is and knows exactly what's happening in that first interaction. Rooney Mara's character, it's strongly implied that she's never even entertained the idea of being with a woman, or entertained the idea that she could be gay. And what gives the film that charge is that there's an element of Carol is pursuing her, and you're realizing very quickly that she's sort of relenting to that.
Yeah. Haynes is a very intelligent filmmaker, and the way I feel about most of his movies is I find them much easier to appreciate as intellectual objects. But the way he depicts these characters navigating this environment, all of these subtleties, is really great.
Yeah.
But to me, it just ends up being too emotionally muted. Once these characters are actually themselves around each other, once they're no longer hiding, I think that's when it gets weak. It just feels unfulfilling, this kind of a climactic sex scene. It just plays like one long contract negotiation.
I don't necessarily disagree. I feel like that scene could have benefited from a little more, well, I hate to say it, maybe a little more nudity.
It just doesn't feel sensual. It feels so clinical. It has this ending that's supposed to be kind of like an emotional high. It's supposed to be like a release.
See, I find the ending enormously powerful.
Oh no, I found it totally unfulfilling.
To bring it back to Far From Heaven, Far From Heaven is a film that is so steeped in the language of the cinema that it's evoking that I feel like that's one where I actually understand people who look at that and feel nothing because it's trying so hard to evoke another filmmaker's language.
Yeah, and another mode of filmmaking.
This is immersive. I really do feel like I've been transported to this world.
Well, because it's a film about the 50s that has a fairly classical grammar to it, but is not trying to evoke 50s cinema at all.
Right, because a lot of period pieces, especially ones set in this period, have this almost museum-like quality to them, where we're looking everything as if through this lens of history. And by shooting a little bit more rough and tumble, I feel like this frees it from that quality, if you know what I mean.
It does feel a little bit more like they've just taken a camera and plunked it down.
We've showed up in the 50s.
Yeah, we've shown up in this department store. We didn't dress it. This is just what it looks like.